Good afternoon, everybody. I see people are coming into the Zoom room. Let's give us a few more seconds to let people keep trickling in. Hope your day is going well. It is Giving Tuesday. If you have not supported your favorite charity, do so soon. They'd appreciate it. All right. Well, we can go ahead and get started. My name is John Hanna, and I am the director of the Center for Civil Society. As I just said a moment ago, today is actually November 28th, Giving Tuesday. So support your favorite nonprofits. If you haven't done so already, go online, send them some money. They'd appreciate it. We're all about philanthropy here at the Center for Civil Society. So again, support your favorite nonprofits. Our webinar today is on the future of Christian higher education. We have two absolute experts. I'm really, really excited about this conversation today. So we'll get right into introducing our speakers. First up is David Beer. David is an associate professor of political science at Malone University, and he's also the director of its Center for Christian Faith and Culture. David, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Joined also is Pete Peterson. Pete is the Braun Family Dean of Pepperdine University's School of Public Policy, and is also a senior fellow at the Davenport Institute for Public Engagement and Civic Leadership. Before we get into the conversation, we have an announcement here at the Center for Civil Society. And Pete, this kind of involves you, but we're really proud and thrilled to announce that our annual Givers, Doers, and Thinkers Conference next year in 2024 will take place on your beautiful campus, Pete, at Pepperdine University. We're really, really excited. It'll be October 23rd and 24th. The theme will be education. The conference title is K to Campus. We will be discussing all sorts of issues, probably from free speech on campuses to school choice, all kinds of stuff related to higher education and philanthropy. We'll put a registration link in the chat right now, but it's truly a conference for everyone. Again, the title of our conference, it's called Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. So whether you're a donor or a nonprofit employee or a scholar, this is a conference for you, especially if you have interest in higher education, education policy. All are welcome. We hope to see you there. Pete, again, thank you for hosting us next year. We're truly excited. That background that you have, that beautiful campus, I can't think of any place that we'd rather be. So again, thank you for hosting us next year. We're so excited.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. We're really excited to welcome everyone to Malibu, California.
Wonderful. Again, I hope that people will join us. Registration link in the chat. So I have some questions for our talk today. Again, we're discussing Christian higher education and the future within the United States. So I have some questions, for both of you. For people that are joining us right now over Zoom, feel free to add some questions to the question and answer box, and I'll try to get to as many as I possibly can. But maybe a good place to get started, we could start with you, David, and then go to Pete. But maybe an obvious question, but why is Christian higher education important within the American higher education landscape? And when I say Christian, of course, I mean Catholic, I mean Protestant, all kinds of Christian, universities and colleges. But, first question, why is it important within the whole landscape of American higher ed? David, what do you think?
Sure, that landscape that you're talking about isn't even just Christian, isn't even just higher education. It's also civil society in general, right? Faith-based institutions have been at the core of American civil society and American higher education from the very beginning. If we look at the denominational traditions that went ahead and founded our first colleges. So this has just been, such a rich part of our American heritage. And is in many ways been part of the thing that gave us such an excellent educational system that we are having, we want people from around the world to come and experience our higher education structure, come to our colleges and learn with us. And we're world renowned for it. So it's just this classic part of the American experience and a real gem that we get to enjoy in our country.
Great. Pete, anything to add to that?
Yeah, certainly the historical nature of Christian higher education, David has covered very well. I would just say that it's important for today, both inside and outside the classroom. I think Christian higher education is able to look at topic areas and subjects in a more holistic way than, frankly, most secular institutions. And in that, whether we're talking about traditional liberal arts education or even issues in the sciences, the so-called STEM fields, that situating those within a Christian worldview is just a more holistic way, I think, of learning and understanding, especially the broader pursuit of the truth, which I know Christian higher education is uniquely committed to. I know that's certainly the case here at Pepperdine. It's one of our founding affirmations. But I'd also say outside the classroom, the importance of community. One of the real cultural challenges that we're seeing for this young generation is loneliness and alienation. All the studies are showing that a real challenge to both psychological and just personal development is loneliness and alienation. And I do think in Christian colleges and universities, that ability to form that broader sense of community, not just within church settings, but certainly within Bible studies, student groups and associations, organizations, but also that broader university commitment to God and a higher power, the importance of who we are as individuals. It just provides a different grounding for a moment that this coming generation, this current generation that's in college, really desperately needs. And I do see that as a unique role that we serve outside the classroom, but still on the campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, jumping off what he's saying here, that outside the classroom isn't even just in terms of the particular campuses, but you think about many of our faith-based institutions are highly localized, right? So these are being rooted in communities, in places, and forming connections with students to local environments in ways that are really beneficial for American civil society to its very core.
Interesting. And so a follow-up question to all of what both of you just said would be, what are the consequences if more Christian colleges and universities close during the coming decades? There's been some predictions, of course, about how drastic this might be, but there's certainly been some closures, there's been some mergers, and to what you just said, David and Pete as well, like these institutions are rooted in communities and they do so much good. But what are the overall consequences if these colleges go under?
We're still debating what exactly the extent of any kind of closures would be. I mean, there have been some. There will be probably some more. Maybe some should close. But certainly in the hardest hit areas, places that have already seen industrial decline and things like that, it's only going to make those situations worse. And you're going to have a situation where essentially you've got an increased even brain drain, where your children growing up in these sorts of areas need to go further and further afield for education, and the possibility is they're not going to come back. So we have real concerns for the communities where these colleges are located. Different parts of the country have different amounts of educational infrastructure. In the Midwest, where I'm located, there's maybe perhaps an overbuilt amount of infrastructure for higher education, and that's been some of the problems with competition, for declining demographics, for our enrollment issues. But in other places, that might not be the same issue, and the local communities will be affected, as well as perhaps maybe the denominations that these faith-based institutions are connected to. So it is a concern. It may be overblown, but it certainly there are challenges that we're facing. So the possibility of closure is legitimate.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd only add to that I think the implications are both for students as well as for scholarship, and I'm coming to understand this in some new ways. I mean, just one quick reflection for students. I do think, as we discussed in the answer to the first question, that it would be a tragic loss if we were to go to the extreme and say what would happen if all Christian higher education institutions were to close. I think that loss would be incalculable, both to this generation and to America as a whole. I think even if you want to look at these most current trend lines that we're seeing around the psychological challenges that students are facing, and the inability to find community in increasingly secular environments, I do think that that is an important role that Christian universities and higher education places. I would also say, I'm thinking about the one of the Pepperdine affirmation statements, and I know this would be shared at a place like Malone and a number of other higher education institutions, goes like this: that the pursuit of the truth, having nothing to fear from investigation, must be pursued relentlessly in all disciplines. And I do think that Christian higher education, within the broader field of academia, understanding that its role is the pursuit of truth in a time which questions whether there is truth, I wonder if the truth is going to be found in its last refuge if these trend lines continue in Christian higher education. And that means something for scholarship. I'm not going to say the Ivy League institution. I'm not here to cast aspersions, but I have to tell this story because the faculty member himself has written publicly about it. I was on the campus at Harvard speaking at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of their faculty members in their School of Public Health, Tyler Vanderweel, has written publicly about the challenges that he has faced as a Christian scholar, a noted epidemiologist and scholar in the field of public health, because of his Christian faith. And I hope the trend lines don't continue as they are, but the increasing ideological nature of scholarship is impacting this pursuit of truth on the part of Christian scholars. And it's important that there be places where people are free to pursue the truth wherever it leads. And unfortunately, in many, and I'm not even talking about the recent events on college campuses the last month, I'm just talking about, do Christian scholars feel like they can pursue the truth, much less non-Christian scholars? I do believe that Christian higher education is the place for great scholarship to happen. And if the current trend lines around the ideological nature of scholarship continue, whatever the discipline, then unfortunately it's going to be the role for Christian higher education to be the home for great scholarship.
And that's not just individual scholarship and kind of broadly construed. It's also, some people have said that Christian higher education is where the church does its thinking. We're not just doing it for ourselves, but we are wrestling as denominations, as the church universal, as whatever frame you want to use, a way to think about this. We're not just autonomous individuals doing our own thing. We are broader connected through our faith tradition, and so therefore there needs to be some place where we investigate these truths, just like Pete is saying, but not just for our own sake, though there is obviously a great virtue and an individual vocation to pursue the truth, but it has consequences for future generations.
Absolutely. Again, if people have questions, just drop those in the question and answer box, and I'll get to as many as I can to David and Pete. My next question. So we have seen a decline in religious affiliation in the United States. And again, this led some people to predict that so many Christian colleges would close right by now. I think that the most famous prediction was that by now, half of them would be closed. This was made, I think, a couple decades ago. I think it was by Clayton Christensen at Harvard. But of course, most have not closed. Like, most are still operating. And some Christian colleges, both Catholic and Protestant, are truly thriving. But if we have this decline in affiliation of religion, why is it that still so many American students and families value faith-based colleges? Like, how do we reconcile what seems to two things that seem to be sort of opposing each other? So again, a secular age, but some Christian colleges are doing just fine. What do you guys think?
I can jump in here and kind of piggyback off some of that Pete's already said, right? I mean, he's talked about community, and many times, even our non-Christian students do sense a difference being on our campuses versus being in other places. There's maybe an ethos, a vibe, a feel that they're going to appreciate and have connection to, even if they are themselves not necessarily of the faith or of that particular denomination or faith tradition. Christian higher education varies greatly in terms of what it actually expects of their students. At an institution like mine, we actually don't require students to make a faith profession to be here. We want to be open and have them join with us. We expect them to abide by our student code of conduct, and we're going to require spiritual formation and Christian formation opportunities from them, going to chapel, things like that. But there's a great value in this, and I think the predictors, making assumptions about students being rational maximizers in a certain kind of way, miss all sorts of things in terms of the local nature of students' connections to places. However, the other thing to think about it is maybe also how the predictions got wrong. They didn't necessarily think about, say, the rise of athletics as part of Christian higher education. And that's part of a broader conversation as well, in terms of, have we prolonged certain colleges through athletics and drawing students those sorts of ways, and how that affects admission. That'd be a fascinating conversation we could have about the effects for colleges, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think David brings up a really good point about the growing secularization and the importance or the connection of that to Christian higher education, and that not only impacting Christian students and parents. It sounds like Pepperdine has a very similar policy as Malone does as a Christian college and university, and that we don't require a faith statement on behalf of our students. But the increasing secularization is being felt by everybody across the culture. I had a conversation just recently with the principal of a growing Christian high school who said, "Pete, we are getting overwhelmed with applications from secular parents who find our high school, our Christian high school, as a place where they can frankly trust us to better educate and prepare their kids." And I think that's a growing awareness on the part of parents, both secular and Christian, that the importance of Christian higher education is to be that home of learning and what you might call the more holistic development of their students or children. This goes also to David's point about, is it just what's happening inside the classroom, as important as that is, or do we all understand that these 2 and 4 years that are spent in higher education really are a formative time for the rest of a person's life? And where do parents, much less students, feel that they're in, dare I say, a safe place to do that? And I do think that Christian higher education, and we're seeing that with the growth of certainly the homeschool movement. This is a through line that starts in kindergarten now, that the response of parents to the increasing secularization in society, and it's worth saying that trend line is felt most acutely and early stage in higher education. The secularization of society is being felt in the secularization of higher education. And parents are certain, and in high school education and in public education more broadly. So I do think for those institutions, whether it's a high school or a college or a university, that makes a clear and demonstrated faith commitment, that they're going to be attractive places, not only for Christian parents and students, but also for secular ones as well.
I totally
Fascinating.
agree with what Pete's saying here about the the clear and compelling case. I mean, I think we should actually be doubling down on our distinctives as faith-based institutions. But he brings up an interesting point that we have to be aware of, that our success in this could in fact bring up another challenge as well, namely, the trap of excellence. Right? You see this oftentimes with Catholic schools,
Very good.
where this is an excellent education, so we want to send our children there regardless of this, and it does affect, right, when you start then pursuing, well, we need to maintain our reputation for excellence, maybe not necessarily focusing on having a critical mass of students who actually do in fact share the faith commitment and want to perpetuate the faith commitment outside the classroom, as Pete keeps talking about, right? So many things go on outside the classroom, and there's a different feel to a campus without a critical mass of students who do in fact share the faith commitment, of the faculty and staff who are trying to spiritually form and morally form these students. So it is a great thing, when we have a reputation for excellence, and we should pursue that, right, to bring glory to God. However,
Yeah.
it could pose a secondary kind of problem and trap for us, where excellence becomes a temptation.
Well, and I'm sorry to piggyback on the piggyback, but just to simply to fill out that conversation I mentioned with this high school principal, he actually saw it as a challenge because, that critical mass that you're talking about of both students and Christian parents are a vital part of the sustaining of Christian institutions, whether they're churches or high schools or higher education. And making sure that you're not only holding true to your faith commitments, but also communicating those clearly to prospective parents and students to say, this is what this looks like. It's not going to be the same as, whatever the state university is or the Ivy League institution is. You're going to have a different experience there. And that's why I think it's so important that you're not only communicating clearly, but you back that up with your demonstrated both programs. And I'll weave in another topic here as well, which if you're going to be open on the front end of welcoming students who don't happen to be Christian, you better be able to, I think, back it up on the back end with what you're doing in faculty hiring and administrators and so forth. That really, as an institution, you need to remain committed, whether it's denominational or broadly faith Christian commitments. That's certainly the case here at Pepperdine. But you are welcoming people into your community. And as long as you're being upfront and clear about that, I'm excited about the future for Christian higher education for the reasons that we're discussing.
That's great. You've both had success as professors and administrators at Christian universities. What advice would you give to professors and administrators who are starting careers at Christian colleges or considering Christian higher education over, say, public schools or more secular schools? So what advice would you have for them in general? And also, when they're talking to stakeholders such as students, families, and donors, like how should they think about the language they use, how they represent themselves? So again, just general advice for people who are, where you were, a few years ago. We can start with you, David.
Sure, I can jump in here. I think partly one, we've framed this in terms of challenges, right? And I think that we have, spoken here to say that there's many positives. The reality is that Christian higher education, particularly small Christian higher education, smaller colleges, face demographic declines, face enrollment declines, and there is the concern, the worry, and as such, there has been too much trying to chase after, right? Every possible opportunity, maybe trying to be all things to all people, and that has been a mistake for many places. There or short-sighted strategies of, say, trying to grow your enrollment through sports. I don't want to name names, but there are some colleges where almost every single student at that college is there because they're an NCAA athlete, and there's the real question of whether or not those students would be there if the athletic programs weren't there. And so, is that really what this institution was founded for? So partly it's be really clear about your mission, be really clear about your value. What are we existing for? What's our mission? And be minding that in a way that's serious, but not freaking out about fears about the future. On the one hand, I always like to tell people as well that higher education has existed, in the Western tradition for over 1,000 years for really good reason, right? We do an amazing thing, right? We get to talk about great ideas. We get to develop young people in ways that transform them. I have one of the joys also in my teaching is that I have not only 18 to 22-year-olds, traditional students, but I often have senior citizens auditing my classes. And they are, in fact, some of the greatest proponents of the liberal arts education that we offer, because they think it's amazing to be able to sit and discuss these really important ideas and maybe how this affects and relates to things that they're seeing in the world around them today. They get the value proposition of education, and I don't think that's going to go away. When Pete mentioned that it would be a tragedy to be lost, we totally agree with that. We don't think that's really what they're talking about, that all of a sudden that would entirely go away. But it could be a situation where we had maybe only some of the largest Christian schools were left, and that could be an issue. So double down on your mission, mind it, pay attention to it. And for faculty members, I think for young people looking at academia, I think you have to tell them that you're perhaps going to need to be a little bit more entrepreneurial than maybe you imagined. Maybe you just enjoyed college, and so you want to see yourself as being a faculty member someday because you get this chance to talk with people, about big ideas. But there's a lot more hustle that's involved now in academia, whether it's launching new programs, starting centers, doing student recruiting, for your particular program, all those sorts of things that are certainly not talked about in graduate school. So that's the sort of the way that I'd think about approaching this if it were from a fresh start and just beginning.
Yeah, I'll just say that almost by nature, if you're a young scholar, if you're completing your PhD, you've come up through, at least in your PhD program, the secular ranks. There aren't many Christian colleges and universities that are offering doctoral research programs. There certainly are some, but chances are you've come up through those ranks. So you've had that experience about learning, maybe adjunct teaching or TAing in a secular environment. So the question really comes, what do you want your life to be? We just recruited a new faculty member who got her PhD, public policy researcher at a top Ivy League university. And she could have gone a lot of other places, but as a person of faith, what was important to her was the prospect of having faith-based mentoring relationships with students. If that's something important to you, not to say that you can't have those on secular college campuses, but it's not going to be encouraged the way it is on a Christian college campus. That was a lifestyle choice that she was making. Now, obviously, the other side of it is, what about large R1 universities? And what if I'm a researcher that requires infrastructure that a large public university or large private university might have? Those are certainly decisions that you have to make if you're in one of those fields. But, there are different reasons why people make decisions about where they go on their academic career paths. And I do see, with this growing secularization that we're seeing, not only of the upcoming generation, but of society as a whole, that Christian colleges and universities are those lighthouses and unique opportunities for faculty and scholars who want to have different relationships with their students. One that is faith informed and faith infused. That there are there are just only limited places where you can have that.
Pete's
That's
making a great
advice.
point.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead,
I'd
David.
follow up too. He says faith informed, faith infused. We like to talk about faith integration as our term, and he's totally right that particularly if you're thinking about entering Christian higher ed and you've gone through the secular system, you may as a Christian have this longing for this, but maybe you actually aren't well adapted to the vocabulary of faith integration. And I assure you, that's one of the things we ask you in the hiring process. And it does trip up a lot of people who maybe, particularly if they've gone through their entire educational career through the secular system, as opposed to maybe, say, going to a small faith-based institution before they went to an R1 school for their PhD. There's a language we use, and each college is different in this, but there's a language we use to talk about how faith makes a difference in what we do on campus and what we do in the classroom. And that's the thing that, as I've sat through hiring committees and I've chaired hiring committees where people have trouble, is if they're not able to, express and articulate maybe what vision that they have, right? So, Pete's young hire, has this vision of mentorship, and that's great, right? She needs to be able to talk about that in ways that help us to see as an institution to say, yep, this is someone who really gets, that we're trying to be different, and we are different from any number of colleges or universities out there. So to be able to understand that language, whatever it looks like for the particular schools, in our case, faith integration is our preferred language.
That's great. Next question. So we currently have a lot of protests, demonstrations on university campuses across the country, right? And I think that college campuses should be places of debate and have viewpoint diversity that encourages respectful dialogue. How might Christian universities navigate the current climate where people on all sides of every issue are very passionate, sometimes even disruptive or violent? How do Christian universities sort of foster creative and constructive dialogue in this current age?
Well, I'll start on that one. I am a major proponent of viewpoint diversity. It's a big part of what we do here at the School of Public Policy. And I think that Christian higher education is uniquely placed to support these kinds of environments. Unfortunately, what we're seeing on a number of college campuses goes back to this question about the pursuit of truth. What we're seeing is the pursuit of power. And if you're not able to have a question about capital T truth and a joint pursuit of that, then every conversation that you're having becomes an argument over who's more powerful, who's in the position of power. And that opens up the whole cauldron of power dynamics, which we're seeing on a number of college campuses, where it's not persuasion, it's not respect for the other, it's not seeing the other person as the imago Dei, it's not the sense of Christian epistemic humility, which understands that we're in a joint pursuit together of the truth, and I don't necessarily know what that is. What we're seeing is you are this person, I am this person, and that there's some power dynamic here that needs to be navigated. We all as Christians sit under the ultimate power dynamic, and that is God as represented by Jesus. That is the ultimate vertical power dynamic. And everything else needs to, especially within the pursuit of truth on a college campus, needs to fit within that. And viewpoint diversity, to me, is just another way of how we pursue the truth together, understanding that we as individuals created by God aren't the keepers of that truth.
I totally agree with what Pete's saying, and I think that the post-truth, right, postmodern environments have a significantly harder time with these conversations. Just the same way that doesn't make any sense. You can't play tennis without a net. there has to be some sort of limitation, some sort of guideline, some sort of boundaries. And so, in fact, what Pete's talking about, how do we even have a civil dialogue with if nobody's sure what they believe, then it simply becomes about what we're going to fight about, right? As he's saying, it's about power dynamics. So we very clearly state what our faith commitments are. Our faculty sign a faith statement. Students are not required to, but our faculty do. And we say, this is what we believe, and we invite you into a conversation about these things. And I'll never shut down a student who expresses a different viewpoint. But I think it's my responsibility to ask questions of that and follow-ups and say, what about this? What about that? If you assume that, what happens here? What are your boundaries? What are you taking for granted? What are you assuming? And we do it in a respectful way. But we're certainly open about what we in fact believe. And I don't know how those conversations happen. Instead of it being a conversation, it becomes, if I could change Pete's metaphor again, it becomes just everybody's own monologues, right? It's no longer conversations. It's just people declaring, their own views on everything. In which case, what are we doing? You don't need to be in a classroom to do that. And that's, in some sense, I think what we see, unfortunately, on the internet, is people, just declaring their own views in their own extended monologues or soliloquies. And that's unfortunate. We should be having conversations.
Great. Question from the chat, and this is about enrollment. It says, as we know, there's a reduced number of students going to college in general, right? But that sometimes seems as a crutch that presidents and admissions officers use for reductions in their own enrollment at their colleges. But the question says, many values-based colleges have waiting lists for enrollments because they aggressively market their values-based education. So the question is, how do we change the narrative so prospective students and families understand the value when it comes to a Christian education? Is it a narrative issue, or is it something else? Any thoughts about this?
Well, I think what the question is maybe getting at is, how do we evaluate when, our leadership may be incompetent? And certainly Christian higher education, is not immune from incompetent leadership the way any organization is. And it's one of the challenges that we have to face, particularly, I think, as faith-based institutions. We often have an ethos and a culture that is more charitable, more forgiving. So I think we have struggles sometimes dealing with disagreements with leadership. But I think the question sort of answers itself, is that we look and we see, like, the places that are faithful are the places that are doing well, right? I think we should be really clear about what our commitments are. We should be really clear about what our value proposition is, and then we should orient all the things that we do around that. For ourselves here at Malone, one of the things we're going through right now is a general education revision. And general education revisions are one of those things that academics, sometimes really abhor because they take forever and they're really contentious and things like that. But at the end of the day, this goes to the very core of what we are as an institution and why we're unique. We should have a unique general education for a unique school. If we're teaching classes that are no different than someplace else, why be here? So I think just pointing out that those trend lines for different institutions is the way we can start to evaluate ourselves and saying, are we really doing a good enough job talking about why we're unique? And if we're not, we need to do better. And if we're not unique, that's its own kind of problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with David. And one of the ways that donors and others can better understand whether what they're seeing on a marketing brochure or website is true is to ask those deeper questions about, well, what is your faculty hiring practice? What is the denominational affiliation, if there is one? What does that look like? What is the student environment there? These things have to be backed up. I would say that I believe that we're entering a period, and I think that October 7th and the aftermath was a watershed moment, not only in world history, but American academic history, where not just donors, but parents, students, otherwise, are asking much deeper questions than, is this a top 50 US News and World Report ranked school? These deeper questions about what does the student environment look like? Am I going to find myself as a student in a place where I have to write for the faculty person's political belief? Am I going to be able to be a person of faith on the quad on this campus? As a parent, do I feel safe, if you will, sending my child into an environment like X? I think we're just at the beginning stages of this. And in that, there is an incredible opportunity both for academic leaders, donors, parents, and others to think about Christian higher education in new ways. I've already said what it might mean for scholarship. I do believe that Christian higher education is going to be the home for great scholarship for decades to come. And you can look at even across the most technical fields that are being ideologically captured in other places, that frankly, it's going to be in Christian higher education where faculty is going to do some of their best work. But obviously the environment for students as well. This is a moment, this could not be a more timely panel. But I really do think this is a remarkable moment for Christian higher education.
Pete, your remarks are a good segue to our next question from the chat. And so the question is, should universities and university presidents be making statements or taking stands on every single issue that's sort of in the public eye?
Well, I can say that it's Pepperdine's position and the position of our president not to do that. We did not make a public statement, for example, on October 7th. At the same time, we welcomed the president of Yeshiva University to campus a couple of weeks ago to talk about these issues. And we have, through events here at the Policy School and other places, found other opportunities to highlight not only the political and national security dynamics of what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, but also, frankly, the growing anti-Semitism that we're witnessing on college campuses. So I do think it's unfortunate that colleges and universities are put in a place where leaders are being pressured. I know our president was pressured strongly to make a statement. But that's not to say that universities can't find other ways to still engage on these very important issues without making a particular statement.
Yeah, I'd follow up by pointing out the kind of the local and particular nature, right? So is there local circumstances, local connections that would suggest that your university has some sort of connection to these events or has some need of saying it, in a situation like in Israel, did you have alumni who lost lives or were affected? Are there local stories? If that's the case, it might be more appropriate. However, if it's just pressure being exerted, for someone else's purposes, there doesn't seem to be the same rationale or authenticity, or even just the rightness of the situation. And as Pete was talking about, responding in appropriate ways. I had a student reach out to me about this and our position on it, and I was able to say, I'm also a member of the clergy, and I lead the daily office on campus, and we included prayers for this, not just once. This was a regular part as we processed the horrific events that we saw. And so as a faith-based institution, it was appropriate for us to pray for this situation, and for guidance and wisdom, and for loss and comfort, all these things. So that's far more significant and appropriate than a president standing up and trying to speak inauthentically on behalf of a community about a subject that maybe the university is not particularly actually connected to.
Interesting. Okay, well, again, thank you both so much. We have one more question and then we'll call it a day. It's from the chat. And so the question is this. It says, within religion and theology departments at Christian colleges, some professors are openly hostile to the faith itself that's sponsoring or founded the college. How much of a problem is this? Like how common is it? And I guess if it is common, what does that say to students and families if you have in the place of a faculty member someone who is just, again, openly hostile to the value or the religion itself? Thoughts about that?
Well, I'll start
from institution to institution. We'll say that, but Pete, please take.
Well, I was just saying that I think this is a real problem nationally. The National Association of Scholars, I remember, did a survey by academic discipline of where were the most secular views taken by faculty in those disciplines, and religion departments were one of those. That's not to say that you can't be a secular person teaching courses in religion. It sounds like from the question, though, what if it's actually belligerent or antagonistic against the faith tradition, either that you're teaching or of the school itself? And I really do see that as problematic. As both David and I have said, we're both at institutions where faculty do have to sign commitments, statements of faith. And we have both, I'm sure, have seen instances where particular faculty have walked away from the faith for whatever reason that might be. That assessment needs to be made by the provost or the department chair. But if those are statements being made in classrooms and in ways that are antagonistic to the faith traditions, it's a very easy question to ask, well, then why are you here? I don't think that's helpful for the students or for the university more broadly. In the same way that you probably wouldn't hire that person in the first place, it is something worth revisiting if there has been a change in that person's view on these matters.
And we're walking the line. Sometimes it's a matter of, it means, say denominationally, right? I'm a member of a school that I am not a member of the founding denomination of my school, right? I respectfully have some disagreements with the position. However, I don't do that antagonistically. And as we keep talking about viewpoint diversity, there's some really good things about teaching at a school that is not insular and secluded only to its faith tradition, particularly its unique denominational background. I love the ecumenical nature of this institution, but it does create some challenges sometimes if I think, as Pete is pointing out, if it rises to the level of open hostility towards even just basic tenets of the faith. We need to, while being respectful, still have a culture of accountability, whether that's through the promotion and tenure process or the post-tenure review process or things like that. We certainly don't want a situation where someone signs a statement of faith to be able to get a job, but wasn't really in fact holding those positions, or as Pete pointed out, maybe changed at some point down the line. The problem, I think, oftentimes is from an outside perspective. There's this notion that something needs to be done about it right now and quickly, when these are complicated matters, and we walk through them with hopefully with integrity, and certainly with wisdom and discretion. As we face those, we have parted ways in recent years with faculty at my institution for disagreements of this kind. The unfortunate situation is if it ends up being a lose-lose situation where you just made no one happy by having some disagreement over an issue. But they're complicated questions, they're complicated discussions, but we are in fact having them. I think that's maybe from outsiders' perspective, they think actually that maybe we're not having them, and we are. Just maybe not at the speed at which outside people want us to have them at.
Great. Well, David and Pete, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. It was truly, truly great. For everyone watching, I hope that you'll join us in person. Again, our Givers, Doers, Thinkers Conference next year is October 23rd and 24th. It'll be at Pepperdine University. Again, Pete, we're really excited. We thank you again for hosting. With that, we'll call it a day, and thank you again both so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye.